Oh, hey guys. Doing a little bit of goal planning for 2022. Have something big on the horizon, we hope. And I do love goal planning and planning for upcoming trips. Matter of fact, the weather is so nice today, I'm going to take the Spyder out, get the oil pressure up, get the temperature up, and just to go out and enjoy the ride and talk about a little bit of goal planning, a little bit about life philosophy around that subject, and I think we're going to call it Zen and the Am Spyder.
We got love that we'll never need to hide. Love will always rise above. Whatever comes, we will be just fine. If I am yours and you are mine, take my hand and let's fly away to another galaxy. Hold me close, I want to feel your love. Together
When we were considering the Spyder, we had to admit to ourselves, at least I did, that really what we're getting is just a big toy, a big expensive toy. Perhaps it's a psychological crutch for me getting older, but does it have any actual practical value? And what are the advantages and disadvantages of Spyder ownership? Like any other expensive asset, it's expensive to purchase, maintain, taxes paid and insured. There is a heightened sense of risk to ride one. Although it's a little bit more statistically safer than a two-wheel vehicle, it's still riskier than my SUV. And like many other commodities, it depreciates. In the summer it's hot, in the winter it's cold. My SUV is statistically much more safer, more practical on multiple levels. In my SUV, I don't need a helmet, wear specialized clothing, an expensive intercom system to talk to Miriam. But what are the advantages? Well, I started flying airplanes at a very young age, 17 to be exact, to the absolute horror of my poor mother, and was a pretty active pilot for 47 years. Owned a few airplanes. I even was an instructor pilot for 16 years, teaching others how to fly. I loved flying. I loved the adventure of flying, tinkering on my airplane, the community of other pilots. But you know, sometimes life just gets in the way. And, well, that's sort of all detailed in my other video a couple years back, John 2.0, where I kind of go through that painful part of my life. So I needed a replacement for flying, and flying simply was not in the cards for a lot of reasons. Not for lack of desire, but anyway. So we considered motorcycle travel. And yes, Miriam was an equal co-conspirator in this endeavor. We'd had several long discussions about the advantages and disadvantages and the risks, and she informed me this is something she really wanted to do. I don't know why, but we love it. We love the ride. We love to take trips. I love to fuss over it in the garage on my free time, to polish it, to make small adjustments, you know, all those kind of things that guys like to do with their machines. And even after almost 5 years, I still look at it with fondness, and it gives me a great sense of satisfaction for the memories we've created with it. I love to just set it, and I love to just look at it in the garage. A psychiatrist would probably have a field day with that. It was a replacement to my airplane. And it's very satisfying to have this as part of my life. While we were doing our homework and the thought and the decision process to get the Am Spyder, we had to get our financial house in order, and that took almost 3 years. We could have gone the traditional route and just gone out and buyed one and financed it. And matter of fact, we had a lot of people just telling us just to do that. They got tired of hearing me talk about it. They just said, go out and buy one. Well, there's a problem with that. Well, number one, my programming from birth. My mom and dad, and the way I was raised, I watched them being extremely financial frugal. Probably my dad frugal to a fault. He worked hard, saved, Spent very little, almost none on anything that would resemble a luxury item. An example that when we were growing up, we only had one family car. My mom worked as a nurse, and trying to juggle the two work schedules with one car was a little tricky. So my dad came home one day with a 1955 Ford pickup truck. To be more accurate, it was a collection of parts that resembled a Ford pickup truck that had to be towed into the yard. My mom actually was dismayed that my dad would actually spend money on something like that. But in about 6 months, he had restored it. It ran great, and the inside of the cab looked showroom new. And he drove that for 8 years, and when he finally sold it, he actually turned a considerable profit. So these were my examples as I was growing up. And then in the 2004 event, where I experienced a set of events that permanently altered the trajectory of my life, to say I was broke, well, that would be an understatement. Rodney Atkins had a song out at the time. It was a country song entitled "If You're Going Through Hell." I swear as if he wrote that song about my existence at that time. It's even hard to listen to it today without getting a little emotional. This was a full 3 years before Miriam and I ever met. As a result of all these experiences, I developed something I call anti-goals. Well, the first one came when I was just new in real estate. My managing broker had taken a bunch of us out for lunch at the office, and as we were sitting there, I watched an elderly man bussing tables at the restaurant. This was a chain restaurant, and I just thought to myself, oh dear God, that guy probably has no choice but to do this job to be able to feed himself. Please don't let me be like that poor guy. It just terrifies me. Kind of like looking at something from the version of the Christmas future, a possible way that your life could turn out if you're not careful. And I had already gone through a really dark spot in my life, and it was coming out of that, and that's like, that terrified me. The next was another example of how I didn't want to live my life. I had gotten a call to show a house to a potential buyer, and I went over and met him at the property. At the time, I was driving my old beat-up Ford SUV. When I finally sold it, it had 324,000 miles on it. Kudos to Ford for building such a nice machine that ran that long. But anyway, it was an absolute beater. But it's all I had to drive at the time, so it's all I could afford. The people who came to look at this house were driving a late model luxury sedan, and I was I felt a little out of place, a little awkward. Showed them the house. They decided they were going to make an offer on the house. We wrote up the offer, and I turned it over to our finance folks to work up the mortgage. Later on that afternoon, my mortgage contact called me, and she goes, "John, this guy's not going to buy anything." And I said, "Why?" She said, "He has 3 loans on that one car. He couldn't finance a doghouse, let alone a real house." And as I began to read on the subject later on, so many Americans are car poor. They will finance luxury automobiles, and they really can't afford them. So for me, the concept of having debt is absolutely horrifying. I never want to be like that guy. You know, and back when I was working as a police officer many years ago, I had an occasion to run across and run into and have conversations with a lot of homeless folks. And most folks don't have conversations with homeless folks. They see them on street corners panhandling, and that's their only contact. Well, I actually had lengthy conversations with them because many of them lived in my patrol zone. When I say lived, they lived under highway overpasses. And you know, they're human beings, and they deserve the respect that anybody would deserve. So I would have conversations with them, and they were candid about their situation. Many had chemical dependency problems. Many had battles with mental illness, or a combination of mental illness and chemical dependency, and some had just given up on life. Life had beaten them down to the point they just gave up, and it was just easier for them to live under a bridge in a cardboard box. And that became another one of my anti-goals. And as a result, I set up some very specific rules in my life. I was going to endeavor to ensure that I had enough money to pay for the basics: food, clothing, shelter, transportation, and health care for the rest of my life, carry as little debt as humanly possible, save money for a rainy day and for my retirement. And then a couple of non-financial goals. One of those is to be very careful of the weight you give the opinion of others, even these so-called experts. And here's an example. This is a great point. I've told this story before. Back when I was a young man in the Air Force, I was studying for my annual physical in the Air Force on this particular day. The physician who gave me the physical was a member of the flight surgeon staff. Now, he was a board-certified medical doctor who also had to have extra training and certifications in aerospace medicine to ensure the flight crews were physically fit and capable of doing their jobs. And he just happened to say, look at my chart and go, Airman, did you know you have zero depth perception? None. Why, it's a good thing you weren't trying to become a pilot, because you could never land an airplane. And I was a E2. I wasn't going to inform this Air Force officer and doctor that he was wrong, but he was wrong. And the reason I know he was wrong, because at that very moment in my hip pocket was my civilian pilot's license. I had landed airplanes hundreds of times at that point with no problem, and was actually in training for my commercial certification, and went on to acquire my commercial pilot certificate, and never had a problem with landing. In fact, it was one of the areas that I excelled in. So if I listened to this doctor and I hadn't started flying yet, my life could have been drastically different, because I listened to the expert of others. So I give the expert opinions of others a little grain of salt with their opinions. So I'm very careful about that. So there's an old philosophy, an old proverb that says that before you die, on your deathbed, you will meet the person you could have been and see the life that you could have had. And that sends chills to the back of my neck. So I've learned that I need to balance my current and future needs, along with making sure I have the ability to give myself a little bit of joy. And so that's the methodology that we use, the philosophy that we use when we move forward to make decisions. And that's one of the reasons it took us 3 years to get our Am Spyder. And why we're not going to go out and buy a 2021 Spyder, although they are some sharp-looking machines. So that sort of sums up how and why we made the decision to buy the Am Spyder. And just a note, it doesn't have to be, if you're listening to this, it doesn't have to be a Am Spyder. It could be, I'm very fond of saying that it doesn't make any difference which magic carpet you have, as long as you have a carpet that gives you magic. So it doesn't have to be a motorcycle. It could be a mountain bike. It could be anything. As long as you have whatever it is that gives you pleasure and it fits into your budget. Now, I don't know where life is going to take me. We never know these things, but I can tell you one thing. I know pretty much what I'm going to take in the form of my personal philosophy and rules for life, and most importantly, my memories. And I'm a big believer in setting goals. You need some significant goals. I've never met anybody who were disappointed because they set their goals too high and missed them. I often talk to people who have never set goals and are incredibly disappointed, or set extremely low goals and they're extremely disappointed. And I'm going to continue to set goals as long as I can. So I want to leave this video with a little poem that I heard a long time ago that is perfect to end today's video. It's called "I Bargained with Life for a Penny." I bargained with life for a penny, and life would pay no more. However, I begged at evening when I counted my scanty store. For life is a just employer. He gives you what you ask. But once you have set the wages, you must bear the task. I worked for a menial's hire, only to learn dismayed that any wage I had asked of life, life would have gladly paid. Thanks for watching, guys, and we'll catch you all next week. Bye-bye.